This miscarriage is something, like we said, that is not often talked about. It's something that we can never truly prepare for, nor should we prepare for that, essentially. I also have experienced miscarriage. I have 4 children on earth, 3 babies in heaven. And through each of my own experiences, the Lord has taught me something very special and something very unique that's helped me to help others in my work. I shared a little bit of, well, actually I shared a lot about my journey in at a recent date night in the marriage ministry. And one of the things that came up after that, some feedback that I received, was just relief over being able to talk about that experience. And so one of the reasons, and it's on your tips for coping here, one of the reasons to understand that people don't talk about it is because sometimes we can feel shame. You know, on some level, and this is not consciously, you know, not because people tell us this, but we wonder, is it my fault? You know, and so that's really important to know. You know, this is not your fault. Research shows that as many as 30% or more pregnancies end in miscarriage, and most miscarriages are due to chromosomal abnormalities and could not have been prevented. So there's nothing that you could have done, right? And that's the question we ask, like, is there something I could have done differently? You know, oh, well, I had that glass of alcohol that, you know, a couple nights before and I didn't know I was pregnant, these kinds of things. And so sometimes that's how the enemy works on us, you know, and the guilt that we can feel, or, you know, maybe we were in a stage of avoiding pregnancy, and there's guilt from that. You know, there could be other reasons. Maybe we felt overwhelmed with the pregnancy, and then we wondered if God was punishing us with this. You know, these kinds of internal struggles are the things that people don't share, because we think we're alone in that, and we're not alone, right? And you know, even when we've been waiting and praying for this baby, you know, at times discovering that we're pregnant, it can be very overwhelming. We're just, you know, how am I going to do all these kinds of things? And so, understanding that piece, you know, God is not punishing us with this. That's not who God is, right? The Lord is merciful. He is our comforter. He is with us in our grief. He is experiencing that pain with us, and He wants us to turn to Him for that comfort. So the second thing here is giving yourself permission to grieve, turning towards your spouse. So that was something that Patrick also mentioned in his book, that instances of divorce actually go up when people have experienced the tragedy of child loss. And so recognizing that men and women grieve differently, and that doesn't mean that everyone's not in pain, right? And then also recognizing that if you have children as well, they're also grieving. Grandparents are also grieving. Family, everyone's grieving and coping with these things in their own way. And so even when people say the wrong thing, you know, which, you know, we're all imperfect. We all say the wrong thing sometimes, right? As a counselor, I always pray, like, Lord, please cover my mistakes, because sometimes I don't have those right words, right? And so, you know, things like, have you gotten past that yet? You know, this is not something we get past, or we're meant to just skip over and move on with our lives. You know, grief is an ongoing process. It's transformed, but it's still there in its own way. So it's okay to take care of yourself. When I spoke with Heather, she had talked about how that beautiful woman in her life said it's okay to cocoon. And I was reflecting on that. Like, what does that mean to be able to cocoon? And kind of, you know, in some ways we're avoiding situations that are going to be very painful for us. Like, maybe baby showers, these things where we're exposed to just the intense pain of that loss at first, But thinking about what's happening, like when a caterpillar is wrapped in that cocoon, right? There's change, there's growth that's happening, there's transformation that's happening, so that that caterpillar can turn into a beautiful butterfly, can be free with an even greater beauty, right, to then share with the world. So, understanding that when we experience loss, the loss of a child or any kind of loss, really, it's going to make us more sensitive for a while. And that's okay. So we need to honor that sensitivity and take care of ourselves, right, to protect our hearts in that way. Also, remaining connected to others and forgiving others when they don't know what to say or say the wrong thing, like we said. It also doesn't help, we do all kinds of things sometimes to rationalize, like to compare ourselves to others. Well, it's not as, my loss was sooner than this one, and it's not as bad, and so therefore, these are ways that we rationalize to kind of, maybe to avoid the pain of the grief. But it doesn't help to minimize the loss. We want to honor that at all stages, and in our own experience. Others, no one is going to fully understand that exact thing that we're going through except for the Lord who's with us, right? But others, we all know what it's like to hurt, to feel pain, to feel loss in some way. Partake in healing rituals. So, naming the baby, holding the prayer or burial service, taking advantage of the sacraments, the Eucharist, confession, anointing of the sick. So I mentioned, in my first miscarriage, it happened on my birthday, actually, very early on, and I did not know how to cope with it. I was probably 5 weeks. I just found out I was pregnant, and I was like, oh, this is too much, and I just moved on. And it was part of a spiritual journey for me, too, of really honoring my own pain and working on my relationship and understanding of who God the Father is, too. My second miscarriage was a very different experience. The whole family was with me when we went to the ultrasound and found that the baby didn't have a heartbeat. And so in a way we were grieving together, and then in the waiting of when am I going to miscarry, when is this going to happen? In the Lord's providence, it happened on a Sunday. I was making pancakes for my family before church, and I was able to, in a sense, give birth, right, to the baby, to recognize the baby in my hand, to experience the depth of that loss with my husband. I called a very dear priest, actually Father Paul, you probably remember, called him on a Sunday. I didn't know what to do. I didn't have a list of resources. He answered the phone on a Sunday. He was Jesus to me that day. He came to my home. He brought the Eucharist. He prayed with my husband, my family. He gave me the anointing of the sick. There were so many things. The naming of the baby. My children had a dream about baby Jimmy, so we named the baby James. I was still praying right before the burial service, and I got the name Samuel. And I Googled, what does Samuel mean? And it was, God has heard. So our second child is James Samuel. There were so many ways that the Lord was showing up in that. And he was also opening my heart to be able to be there for others in a deeper way. And so our suffering opens our heart to love more deeply, and there's so much grace in that. So also paying attention to our physical and emotional health. And so you might have experienced this yourself. You may have loved ones that you know that are after the fact, recognizing that we're going through physical changes. Our bodies are going through those physical hormonal changes as well as our grieving process. And we need to tend to those things, so going to to see a gynecologist, maybe see someone, an NFP specialist, someone educated in agrotechnology, just exploring potential underlying health issues, these kinds of things. I struggle with autoimmunity, so there was things, layers to that as well. So we have to nourish and care for our bodies to support that grieving process too. And next, to pray and ask the Lord to reveal himself amidst the suffering. So in my third miscarriage, it was a completely different experience than the second. We found that in the ultrasound, the baby didn't have a heartbeat, but I had a mass growing inside of my body, and the mass was growing rapidly. My HCG levels were going up and up and up, and so it was very confusing. I'm like, was the ultrasound wrong? Is the baby, still in there? What's going on? So I went through massive amounts of testing, and they thought it was a molar pregnancy. During that time, I wasn't able to care for my children. Hormonal surgeries, I was very unwell, and I had to surrender and accept help from people, which was something that was very difficult for me. And then, just wondering what's going to happen. And it was Holy Week. I had a sense that this was going to happen on Holy Week. Holy Week, I had to have an emergency DNC. And after that, I felt a really intense sense of emptiness, something that I had never really experienced before. And I see that as a grace as well. The Lord was in the emptiness. It was so different than the healing birth and the healing blood of the second. There was no blood. It was just that. Okay, now how do I even understand this? What do I do with this? And so I'm home recovering with my children, and on Good Friday, my son Aaron, who's my second, my special one, if you know what I mean, he's very spiritually sensitive as well, so he busts in the front door and he's like, Mom, you gotta see this, come outside, you gotta see this. And so I open the door, and there's a floating rainbow just right above the pasture, right in front of our front door, just right in our front yard there. And he's running around going, it's God's promise, it's God's promise. And so that understanding, I didn't know what that meant, except that God is faithful, right? So our hope is not in the outcome, our hope is in the Lord. He is the beginning and the end of our hope, and we hope that through this, in uniting our suffering with his, that we will see the glory of God. And he shows up everywhere. So it's such a gift to be able to walk with people in the depth of their suffering. And to not be afraid to do that, to not be afraid to go into the deep and be there with somebody, because that is how we experience Christ, right, in the world. We are the hands and feet of Christ. St. Teresa of Avila, Christ has no body now but yours. So thank you for coming. I know many of you have come for yourselves and also for family and for people you minister to. So please share these resources, these tips here. I'm hoping that we can get them on the church website too, and so we can follow up on that, just so that as women, as families experience this, they have some resources available. And so you have these tips on the front, and you have on the back of yours, you have resources at St. Mark's and also diocesan community resources. And then our book resources as well. And then if anyone is having complicated grief and needs that support, they can feel free to reach out for counseling and our information. My name is Christine Wisdom, and the practice, we have 3 other wonderful Catholic counselors who are all here to support you for whatever you need. So thank you.